சிறுகதை இலக்கியத்தில் பெரிதும் விரும்புகிறவர். 1990 கதா சாகிதி என்ற அமைப்பை ஏற்படுத்தி திரு பாப்பினேனி சிவசங்கருடன் இணைந்து ஒவ்வொரு ஆண்டும் சிறந்த கதைகளை தேர்வு செய்து தொகுப்பாக கடந்த 33 வருடங்களாக தொடர்ந்து வெளியிட்டு வருகிறார். அமெரிக்காவிலிருந்து வெளிவரும் தெலுங்கு நாடி பத்திரிகையின் ஆசிரியராக, தெலுங்கு வெலுகு மாத இதழின் ஆலோசகராக பணிபுரிந்திருக்கிறார். தெலுங்கு அசோசியேஷன் ஆஃப் நார்த் அமெரிக்கா நிறுவனத்தின் அழைப்பின் பேரில் அமெரிக்காவிற்கும், தெலுங்கு கலா சமிதியின் அழைப்பின் பேரில் குவைத் நகரத்திற்கும் சென்று அங்கு நடந்த நிகழ்ச்சிகளில் பங்கு பெற்றிருக்கிறார். கேந்திரிய சாகித்ய அகாடமி தெலுங்கு பிரிவில் ஜெனரல் கவுன்சில் உறுப்பினராக 5 ஆண்டுகள் செயல்பட்டிருக்கிறார். தெலங்கானா விமுக்த போராட்ட கதலு மற்றும் தெலுங்கு கதா 1960 85 வரல வந்த கதைகளை ஒரு தொகுப்பாக கொண்டு வருவதில் தொகுப்பு ஆசிரியராக இருந்திருக்கிறார். பத்திரிகைகளில் விமர்சன கட்டுரைகள், கதைகள் மற்றும் கவிதைகளை எழுதியிருக்கிறார். திரு வாசிரெட்டி நவீன் அவர்களை குவிகம் இணைய வழி அளவளாவல் நிகழ்வில் உரையாட அன்புடன் அழைக்கிறேன். அவருடைய உரைக்கு முடிந்த பின் కేள்వి பதில் నిగழ்வு தொடரும். తిరు నవీన్ సార్, మీరు ఇక అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకొని మీరు మాట్లాడండి ప్లీజ్. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
Good evening everybody. I'm sorry I'm unable to speak in Tamil as your regular meets goes in Tamil only, but I can't. That's unfortunate thing. It is always I used to say we live together in one country and we don't know what is happening in the neighbor language, and we don't know what is happening in North India and South India, wherever it is possible. About the Marquez, we do talk about the Pakistani short story, we do talk about the Western literature, but we don't know what is happening for Telugu people in Tamil and Tamil people in Odia people in... This is all the language barriers are there in our country. Unfortunately, even after 25 years or so, not able to reach you properly other than English. So sorry for that. And even if I speak in Telugu, you may not be understand. Maybe 1 or 2 people like Chellappa sir may understand, but other people may not understand. So I start my presentation in English. See, when Gauri, I thank Kuvigam for inviting me for this unique program. Why I said unique is, regularly you organize it in Tamil. Being a non-Tamil person, you invited me and shows your great heart. So I thank Gauri Kruvanandan, Mr. Kruvanandan, for inviting me for this program. They told me that this program is being organized for several years, and this is a unique one. I am honored to be here along with you today. And when they asked me to what topic you will speak, then I said simply, and what I can speak, I can only speak on Telugu short story, or any short story. In fact, I prefer to talk in Telugu short story. Why? Because if I wanted to know anything about short story, Tamil short story, I should hear it from Tamil people, because though I read some of the Tamil stories through English, but if it is Tamil, I could have understand more. So if I don't know much about Tamil literature, as the way you may not be knowing much about Telugu short story also. See, Telugu short story has a history of around 120 years. See, in every language, there is a controversy about what is the first short story in their own language. Everywhere it is there. Even Bengali it is there, even in Tamil it is there, even Kannada it is there, even Telugu also it is there. If somebody says in Tamil, Bharati's story is the first one in 1905, and 1905, and somebody says Vavesu Ayer's story is the first one in 1910 or 15, something like that. But it's a controversy. But one way it is controversy, one way it is not at all a controversy. Why? Because the story though it is the first or second or first or fifth or whatever it is, it evolves through years. It evolved through years in every language. The same way in Telugu also, till recent past, we thought that the first Telugu short story is published in 1910, written by Gurzada Apparao. Its name is Diddu Batu. But of late, very recently, for the last 20 years, everybody started researching about it, and then somebody came out with one other story written by Bandar Rachamamba, and some other story. They came out with some other story written by Madapadi Hanumantrao, who was our chief minister of Telangana. And some people said it is Arudra said it is the famous Arudra who lived all his life in Chennai only, Madras only. He said Raisam Venkat Sivudu wrote the first story in Telugu. This controversy goes on. But finally, around 4 years or 5 years back, in 10 years back, exactly, I will tell you. In 2015, we published a book. This is the book published by us with the help of Telugu Association of North America, as our madam just telling us. This speciality of this book is not 1 or 2 or 4 or 5. There are 90 stories published before Gurzada Apparo's supposed to be the first story, 1910. And prior to that, there were around 92 stories we found. This is the book with these stories. If we go in detail about the book, I came to know it's very interesting points are there. Even for Telugu people also, even till today, some of the Telugu people may not know that these many stories have come so far before 1910. So again, the question is, what is the first story? As I said again, the importance is not the first story or first published. The importance is how it evolved, how it traversed, and what were the genre of the stories, and how whether the story is traveled along with the society movements and etc. and etc., or it has an independent nature without anything else. That is more important. But for the people like you, not much known about the Telugu story, I just narrate one or two important aspects in this first aspect. There were about, I said, before 1910, there were about 92 stories. Out of that, very interestingly, 25 stories were written by women. Before 1910, 25 stories out of 92 were written by women. The women authors were around 13 authors we found. And there are 37 stories written by men. Of 30, again 13 in number. So 50% of the, not stories, 50% of the writers prior to 1910 were women. This is important. It is a notable important point. And the second thing is, the first story, what we took is the criteria for taking the first story is either the editor who published the story said that it is a story, or the writer who wrote the story said it is a short story. These are the two criteria. With this criteria, we have brought about these 90 stories. Out of this, the first story published is in 1895. It is named, the name of it is, first story is in 1879, Chilukanu Gurinchina Sambhashana, the dialogue about the parrot. The dialogue about the parrot is the first story. Unfortunately, we don't know the author. In the book published in that particular magazine known as Janavinodini, the writer's name is not there. It is missing. The same way, from then onwards, 1979 onwards, till another 6-7 years, the stories what we found are without the writers. But after that, 17 stories were without the writers. But for me, as a researcher of the short story, as a fan of the short story, as I'm interested in researching about the short story, writing articles about the short story, what I found out of this 92, the first will be, though it is the authors and the uh, editors mentioned it as the short story, I thought the first story, which is in the real story format, is written by Rayasam Venkat Sivudu in 1895. Its name is Papamu Setaku Enta Gati Pettinadi. I don't know how it translates into Telugu. You have to tell. Papamu Sitaku Enta Gati Pettinadi. Alas, how unfortunate Sita is. Something it goes like. So this is the first story I consider from my perspective. So from then onwards till Gurujada, there are around 90 stories. All the stories reflecting certain women problem, some stories reflecting the necessity, telling about the necessity of the woman education, and some stories they say about the remarriage of the woman, and so on and so forth. So these are the these 90 stories were published in those days, the monthly magazines, and some of them in quarterly magazines, some of them in half yearly magazines. Fortunately, most of them you may feel proud of it now at least. More than 50% of those magazines are published from Madras. More than most of them are from Tambuchetti Street. So that was the scenario of the early Telugu story. Then afterwards, the story, Telugu story, then the important thing is Gurujada Apparao. Gurujada Apparao wrote only 5 stories. He died in 1915. He died in 1915. One story is published after his death. Before that, when he was alive, 4 stories were published. Out of that, the first one, his first one story is the Dubatu. The other one is Pedda Masidu, and other stories goes on like that. But important thing to note here is he wrote 5 stories. The 5 stories, out of the 5 stories, one is about the heckling the religion. One should, the Pedda Masidu is the story about the religion. See, religion is for the internal purpose, for our personal purpose, not to the it should not be barricades. It should not create any barricades among the humanity and other. That's so it says about that. The second story is denouncing the caste system of Telugu land. The third story is freedom for women, and the other one is about the prostitutes. In those days, especially in West Godavari district, the prostitution is become the major issue in those days from from then to North Andhra. So he wrote about a story about that, and the last story, his last, and his story written in 1910 says about the first story says about the education, necessity of the education to the woman. That is the Dubata. So my observation of these is these 5 stories, they go in 5 streams in Telugu short story history. One stream is led by Gudipati Venkatachalam, later by Gudipati Venkatachalam. He wrote all his life, all his writings about the emancipation of women, or is the freedom for the woman, or the, what do you call, the woman-centered stories only he wrote. That is Gudipati Venkatachalam. And some of the stories written in those days were the next stream is about the caste system. denouncing the caste system. There are several stories came afterwards. One is written by a famous short story writer Muddu Krishna. He was also living in Chennai for a long time, Madras. Of course, most of the Telugu writers in those days, they lived in Madras only. An interesting thing is, uh, though it is not related to the story, I would like to share with you is the great Subramanya Bharati. He died in Madras in 1921. But the same way, our Kandukuri Veeresilingam is almost a contemporary, though he lived 70 years, and Bharati lived only 40 years. He came to Madras all the way from Rajahmundry for his medical purpose, and he lived there for 6 months. I don't know whether Bharati and Veeresilingam they met at least once or not. I don't know, but Bharati wrote a novel about Veeresilingam, Chandrika. Maybe everybody knows about it. Chandrika is written uh, basing on the basing on character of Rajya Lakshmamma, wife of Kandukuri Veeresilingam. It's a different story. So the same way, even Kandukuri Veeresilingam also lived for 6 months in Chennai, in Madras. Though now I am calling as Chennai, I used to call it as Madras only. It is a very, I don't know, I'm used to it actually. 1 second, please. Net meeting lo unnanamma. Later on, all the Telugu stories, most of the Telugu stories, they go along with the society. The changes reflected in society, reflected in Telugu star story also. Whoever the writers, maybe Muddu Krishna, maybe Kododri Ganti Kutumbarao garu, she translated. She is going to translate a story. I requested Gauri Kribandan to translate a story of Kutumbarao, novel of Kododri Ganti Kutumbarao garu. He is a great writer. He lived in Chennai, Madras again. He was the editor of Chandamama for about 50 years. He is a very close associate and friend of Bhanumati Garu and everybody. He is a very great writer. He wrote around 10,000 pages in the genre of the short story. He wrote novels, he wrote essays, he wrote critical analysis, he wrote literary criticism and whatnot, everything he wrote. He wrote science essays. And Kutumbarao Garu is a great personality. He continued the legacy who taken up by Gurujada. And then afterwards, there are the prominent writers like this is because this is 120 year story. I am able to tell the complete history step by step or at length. In a nutshell only, I'll be able to tell you. Then afterwards, the writers like Kommuri Venugopal Rao Garu, again Gauri Gurumandan translated his novel recently, very recently. It is going to be published in Tamil. Kommuri Venugopal Rao Garu, who is a relative of again Gudupati Venkatachalam, and also Kododri Ganti Kutumbarao Garu. So the literary activity was centered in those days at Madras. Most of the Telugu writers, they used to live in Madras, except a few who came from northern part of Andhra Pradesh, like Gurujada or Muddu Krishna or somebody else. And then afterwards, between 50s and 60s, a radical change occurred in Telugu literature. That is, a populistic literature came into existence. Till then, the Telugu short stories reflect the social problems, the reformistic tendencies, and all those things. But 1950 onwards, a populistic tendency started in those days. By the by by the year 2000, 1960, the writers like Ranganayakam, writers like Eddarampudi Silochana Rani, the writers like Koduri Kausilya Devi, and they are very popular among the women folk, especially. They enriched the literature, I can say. Though it is a populistic literature, they took the reading habit to the women folk. So 50% of the population, they used to the first time they used to read Telugu, they used to read their novels, especially not stories. They wrote some of the stories, but the, the reading habit has been increased, is doubled by these prominent populistic writers. With that populistic writings, again, the Telugu short story flourished in a different way. Then 60s onwards, the Telugu literature is driven by the communist movement. 52, it's like in 1952, almost in Andhra Pradesh, everybody thought that communist government is going to form. Government is going to form the government, but with a few seats, it could not happen. In 52 elections in Madras province, it's not Andhra Pradesh, Madras province. So that communist movement is driving force behind Telugu short story in those days. The major writers from then, Ranganayakama is one of the writers, woman writer, and then she wrote several stories. And then Kutumburao Garu, Kodadu Kutumburao Garu is the major contributor to these type of communistic stories in those days. And at the same time, from 40 to 50, there was a great depression period. In those depression period, Kutumburao Garu wrote several stories and novels about the depression. The right from the this character of the Telugu story continued from Gurujada onward. Right from the inception of the Telugu short story, uh, is right the to our previous stories. Always Telugu story travels along with the society, along with reforms, along with the movements made with the communist movements, made with the reformist movement, made with the other social movements, made the the Naxalite movement, or whatever it is. The Telugu short story moved along with these uh, movements. Uh, then afterwards, Telugu short story, after along with the communist ideology, Telugu short story is being diversified with several subjects, like the Tripura Garu wrote several stories about experimental stories. Even our Sri Sri, the famous poet and lyricist, Sri Sri wrote half a dozen stories of about existentialism and other about existence with existentialistic ideology. And when 70s came, again as I said previously, the Naxalite movement in Andhra Pradesh it was in those days. Everybody was thinking about, every government is uh, taking steps to reduce or to uh, 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 to stop the further growth of the Naxalite movement. And there were some encounters throughout the state. In Jalagam Vengalrao period, there were 300 to 400 encounters in the span of 5 years in Andhra Pradesh. So reflecting in those days, in 70, there was an association formed called Revolutionary Writers Association, Viplava Rachayitala Sangam, Revolutionary Writers Association, the writers wing of the Naxalite movement. In fact, one way we have to say like that. Though they accept it or may not accept it, it is a fact that it is the literary wing of the Naxalite movement. So they have given a lot of trust to the literature, especially the short stories also. So from then onwards, every young writer who wanted to get recognition started writing to support the Naxalites. Whether they know about Naxalism, whether they know about communism or not, but the people used to write about them. Some of them stories are very uh, nominal. Stories are there. Some of them are very good stories are there. In between, I should not forget about telling you, there was a great movement in Telangana here. Before formation of Andhra Pradesh, there is a state like called Telangana, the erstwhile Nizam state. There is an armed struggle was going on from 1942 to 1951. 8 years there was an armed struggle against Nizam. That armed struggle was led beginning in the beginning days. It was led by Congress people, and then it was taken over by the communists, and they took arms. They fought against Nizam with arms, and they occupied around 10,000 of 10 lakh of acres, and they lost around 3,000 lives. So with that, they could able to liberate certain areas, liberate quote unquote again certain areas. They could able to uh, finally uh, the Indian government came, Union Army came, and Nizam agreed to be part of India. So with that, though the struggle looks to be stopped, but it is not stopped. The communists later continued to they continued to go for the struggle only, armed struggle only. The Communist Party was banned in those days. In my observation, I have actually collected the stories published. I have actually collected the stories in representing the Telangana armed struggle in those days. As per my research, there were around 110 stories were published during that 8 years from Telangana as well as from Andhra. And around half a dozen, around 15 novels were also published. These stories, basically, they may not have the much literary value, but they have the value of the present, the then society. It will represent and reflect the people's the struggle of those days. It is one of the important uh, addition to the Telugu Shastra. And then afterwards, so I am skipping slowly because that my time is getting near. So I'll start about telling about from 1990 onwards. 80 to 90, there were stories like Ravi Shastri Garu, Rachakonda Vishwanath Shastri, a famous short story writer, who wrote around wrote very less stories, around 60 to 70 stories. Alipatan Ramarao Garu, who wrote only 40 stories. They were so famous in those days, even now. Without talking about Ravi Shastri, without talking about Kalipatan Ramarao, we cannot talk about a communist story in Telugu. The impact of these two writers on Telugu Shastras. And both of Kalipatan Ramarao Garu got this Sahitya Academy Award, but Ravi Shastri and those people, they did not get the award. One thing, even though they got, even though they would have refused, even they got, they would have refused because they were, most of them were in the revolutionary writers movement. So 80 to 90, it was a very turbulent period in Andhra Pradesh because of the Naxalite movement and all those things. In 1990, a significant change was there. A significant change in Telugu star story. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are the instrumental in that significant change. Me and my co-editor Papineni Sivasankar. Can you excuse me for a moment? I'll take water and then come.
స్థిమిత పడండి, తర్వాత మాట్లాడదురు కానీ
ఏమండి?
తాగి స్థిమిత పడి మాట్లాడండి.
Actually, I wanted to note down so much of notes for this, but since yesterday onwards, I was trying to write down but I could not write because of this hand. So I am speaking on my basing on my memory only. Sometimes I might have skipped some of the major writers or major short stories also. So 90 is the important criteria for me and in my life as well as the Telugu short story life, because my life is almost interrelated to Telugu short story. This is not an exaggeration. I want to be the fact. With humbly, I am saying it. In 1990, me and my co-editor Shiv Shankar wanted to start an anthology reflecting when the yearly best short stories anthology. Why we have started this is, in 1985, Hyderabad Book Trust people, they asked me to edit a short story anthology. So I thought of editing a short story anthology in a view that when I studied the previous anthologies, all the anthologies started with the story written by Gurujada Apparao. It was in 1910, and most of the anthologies ended with Rachakonda Vishwanath Shastri's stories, which is in 60. All the 5 or 6 anthologies edited by several people, may it be the Sahitya Academy, may it be the National Book Trust, or somebody else, all these books, all these anthologies were ended up to 60 only. Then there is no representation to the young writers, the then young writers. So I wanted to start that Hyderabad Book Trust anthology with 1960 as the base period. That's why, as our Gauri told just now, while introducing me, I was the editor for the anthology 1960 to 85. For that, it was a Herculean task for me. I could not get the magazines. Most short story anthologies, 1980, there are very few anthologies in Telugu, very few anthologies altogether. From the beginning to till then, there were only about 200 to 300 anthologies. But now, within these 20 years, there are around 1,000 to 2,000 anthologies are there. So, to collect the stories from 60 to 85, it became an Herculean task. And most of that period, 60 to 85, one way the populist literature is going on, short stories are going on, the other way the serious communist literature is going on, and the other way the experimental stories also are being published in those days, like Tripura and other people. So it was very difficult for me to find out the stories, since the writers or the publishers did not publish any short story. So I have to go through to the libraries, find out the magazines and find out the magazines and select the story. To select 25 stories, you won't believe it or not, you won't believe it. It took 5 years to me to select 25 stories. It took 5 years, because to get, I overheard a story that by so and so is a great story. I don't know where it is available. It is not alive. I don't know where it is available. So finally, we published that Hyderabad Book Trust. They published that book with 25 stories. With that experience, I thought, why can't we go for a yearly anthology which will be helpful to the future generations? So that's why we started in 1990, published yearly anthology. In 1990, we started, there were around, in those days, there were around 3,000 to 4,000 stories being published in every year in different magazines. Out of that, we have selected 17. 1990, there were 17 stories. There were so familiar writers were there in those days. So out of that, we selected 17 stories. From then onwards, this is our 33rd year publication. We have to bring out 2022 now. I can proudly say that, I don't know whether in any other language it is coming or not. In English, the best American short stories, as everybody may be knowing about it, the best American short stories is being published in US for the last 105 years. So for few years, Katha, prize stories, Delhi people, Geeta Dharmarajan, She used to publish Kada Prize stories for about 10 years through yearly short story and short story anthology in all Indian languages, selecting each one from each language. So that went on for 10 years. The British publishing house Granta published for about 10 years the best English short stories published from UK, or something that goes on like that. But we are doing it for the last 33 years. We have for the last these 30 years. I've got a great experience with short story and great experience with the story, the subject of the stories, and also the importance, as I said, not because just 1990 we started the bringing out an anthology. It has got an importance, very social relevance uh, in Indian economics as well as Indian politics. One is the new economic policy came into existence in 1990. The same way, uh, identity politics with the what you call the identity policy politics started in 1990. So the people started writing condemning the new economic policy against there was a huge movement here in Andhra Pradesh in those days, Telugu land in those days, against the new economic policy and reforms and other economic reforms. So a lot of Telugu stories were reflected in those. A lot of Telugu stories were written by the people like Kuppili Padma, the people like Kadir Babu, the people like so many people wrote about the influences of the new economic policy and the rural life, influences of the bad influences of the um, um, bad influences on the um, what you call the factory salaried persons and all walks of life, especially the rural life. So though several stories have come out, fortunately or fortunately we started fortunately we are publishing a yearly anthology, so most of those stories are reflecting in our anthology as you can find them in our anthology. This identity politics also started in uh, 1990s only, like the regional identity. The Telangana movement started in 1990 itself, 1990 to 95. Separate Telangana, though it was one, Andhra Pradesh was one state, now it is two states. Linguistic states as the first time the barrier of the linguistic states, or whatever you call it, is the linguistic state philosophy is broken down for the first time in Telugu land. Now Telugu speaking are in two states. Um, so the the people of Telangana, they wanted Telangana separate state. With that theme, there are several stories published in those. The same way, the identity politics, like Dalit writers, they wanted to say them to write stories about themselves. And the same way, the woman, the 1990 itself, women's literature started in Telugu, especially when Volga started writing Prayogam, a short story, a long story, in fact, a novelette, and she was the pioneer in publishing women's liberation stories in those days in 1990. It was the story. It was the and she wrote about the uh, stories about women body, their eyes, beauty, and so many things. So don't see woman as the symbol of the beauty and other. So she started writing in those days. These are all identical politics, right from the regional politics, the regional identical politics, regional and casteistic identity politics, gender identity politics, then gender sensitivity politics. All those came into this our story. Then, especially when the story about the woman, we should talk about Satyavati Garu, P. Satyavati, one of the pioneer of our Telugu short story recent past. She wrote a wonderful story. It is called, I really like that story. It is called Supermom Syndrome. I think you have translated it. I remember that. Supermom Syndrome is a wonderful story. It's a story about a woman who died. After death, that the whole body became the white, whole body became white, and when you touch it, it looked like a stone. And when you scratch it, uh, 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 like some sort of material comes out of the body. So nobody understand what it is. Finally doctors came, they could not find out what it is. Finally one doctor told it is because she used to swallow several tablets to cater the needs of their family for the men folk. So with that her body became like that. This is called Supermom Syndrome. It's not a realistic story, but the theme and the way she told is a really it's one of our milestone story in women's Srivada literature. Then afterwards, now the after the identity politics came, the Bahujanavada stories came. The Muslim minority people, they started telling their own stories like Sky Baba and other people. And Penguin published these stories and also. So it's going on like that. And with this, what is happening is the diversification of the subject because of new economic policy, because of the identity politics and all those things. And at the same time, communist movement has took a little back. With that, the Naxalite movement is also step towards it is step. I cannot say it is not there now, but the influence of it is not much much as it was. So that place is being taken over by the identity politics now. The whole Telugu stories are being most of the Telugu stories are coming with the subject of identity politics even now. The Dalit question, the woman question, as well as the Bahujan BC question, the stories are being written on these subjects. Now that phase is also slowly fading out. Now the Telugu literature is in search of the subject. Telugu short stories is in search of the subject. That's why people started writing. They don't know what to write, how to write. They don't know what is the driving force for Telugu short story now. It is not clearly, I cannot say about it now. Why? Because there is no driving force like the communist movement, like the Naxalite movement, like the identity politics, like the against new economic policy, or women's Srivada. All these movements are slowly fading out. And now what to write? This is the basic question in front of our writers now. And that is being replaced by some of the writers. They write about their childhood, or what we call the Purajñapakalu, the previous, our previous childhood, or go into their dreams. They started writing, go into their dreams, and with that, so many experimental stories are coming out nowadays. And if I say about the experimental stories, the society, touching all these subjects, as I said in the identity politics and other things. V. Chandrasekhar Rao wrote several exceptionally good stories with a lot of experiments. He wrote around 70 to 80 stories and 2 to 3 novels. Exceptionally good stories. And I can't compare with anybody. If at all I have to compare with J. Mohan in Tamil. And Paul Zakaria in Malayalam. So it's a lot of experimental stories he wrote. Now, as I said, the subject is the Telugu stories in such of the subject, but still there are some good stories even now. But unfortunately, when we started in 1990, it is very difficult for us to select 50 stories. It is very difficult for us to select 15 to 20 stories out of thousands of stories. But now it is very difficult to get 15 stories, good stories to publish in our anthologies. So I don't say that this will go for a long time, but if we go into the studies of the, if we go into the, if we study the Telugu short story history closely, for every 10-15 years, this lull period is there. From 50 to 60, yes, there are stories which are not notable. There are 70 to 80, there are lull stories. Yes, there are 2000. Now this period is going on. There should be, in my opinion, there should be a driving force for every writer to write a story. Now the lack of driving force from the society is the reason for the lull period. Even in this lull period also, writers trying to write about, they extend their subject to trying to extend their subject to the new horizon in both ways. One is subject wise, the other way the way how to tell the story. The previously is about telling the incident. You narrate an incident, out of that you elicit one, you create an empathy in the readers. But now you create an empathy in the readers not by narrating an incident, it just by narrating the character of the characters. He will not say anything. A writer particularly will not say anything. He will narrate you about half a dozen characters. The story ends. You will be able to know what he wanted to convey. That is one way of telling the story nowadays. Mere characterization itself becomes the story. In some stories, the dialogue, just a dialogue, a few dialogues will create an impact on you. So there are several experiments are going on. Now the Telugu story is an experimental stage. Unfortunately, the last two Telugu stories is we don't have a good translators like Tamils have. Tamils have very good translators to translate into English, like Kannada literature, like Malayalam literature, like Tamil literature. See, Jayakanthan is known everybody. Throughout the India, Jayakanthan. But equally good short story writer, Kutumrao don't know anything. Kutumrao is not known to the other Indian readers. The same way, even our Jay Mohan, beautiful translations are coming, Jay Mohan stories. And the same way, Perumal Murugan. Whatever it is, the Perumal Murugan is an icon nowadays for Telugu literature. Tamil literature. They have very good translators. Unfortunately, Telugu doesn't have that much of good translators into English. Fortunately, we have some translators to Tamil. We have like Gauri. We have some translators like to Malayalam, like Allah Swami. We have some like good translators to Hindi, like Lakshmi Reddy Garu, Jail Reddy Garu. And some people are translating into but English is more important. Unless our stories goes into English, the world doesn't know about Telugu language, or Telugu writers, or Telugu subject, or history of the Telugu land. This is the unfortunate scenario of the present day. At this point of time, I think it's the time for me to take a break. Break in the sense, if you have got any questions, ask me.
It's a wonderful talk, Mr. Naveen. It's a fantastic. As you said, the stories have to travel in that period. But as regards the whatever you told, there has been a driving force like some communist movement or something is going on. But in Tamil, it is always said. Even I would like to want to question is there whether there was a stories about the freedom struggle that I will you can answer in that. No problem. Yeah, what
What's that?
happened is
Stories about
freedom struggle. Freedom struggle.
freedom. There are stories. Yes, there are stories.
Okay. And there is a complaint against Tamil writers is they have not written much. There are items. No, not much have written. One more thing is experimental writing has started from very long time. And if time permits, I would like you to tell me only one story which I will specify. That story which that buffalo yields a calf, no?
Which one?
Buffalo yields a calf.
Ah.
That story is there, no? That you know that very well. But that type of stories are an entirely different scenario are coming in. Again, Tamil, the point is the story had earlier there was a condition that there should be a beginning, middle, there should be a
Yes.
struggle, there should all these things have now gone, even
Gone.
in every story, everything gone. But now that even that particular story which I was with you on that time, that was really impressed me. That subjects they take that one. Second thing is as regards the evolution going on, the experimental stories do find a very, very, very big place, a very larger space in Tamil. One more thing one person observed, we were writing about the families. Now stories have walked out as families, it's not a society. If you see the most of the writings now, it is not about one single family, brother, sister, family, and struggle are not now taking much of center space. Now they are going out of the they are seeing societies and that their what you call their societies and all the practices that their the thought process. Okay. With that, that story will reserve it for the last minute if you have got. At least tell me the synopsis. Before that, I would like to ask Mr. Rajamani to start the interaction. Please, Rajamani, you unmute yourself and do it. Rajamani, is there? Yeah. Rajamani, unmute பண்ணிக்கோங்க சார்.
Sir, I am very happy. Really, you are doing a wonderful service to the Telugu literature. Congrats, my wishes. And one more thing, I want to two things. Tamil literature is more influenced by French style. Initially, whether it is Russian, whether it is any correlation, one thing. And now the present day short stories. What about the style, content, and the theme? And certain not 2-3 questions only. And most of the now in South India from migration to US, the major contingent is from Andhra.
Yes.
What is that influence in short stories?
Yes.
That is also more important.
Yes.
And one more thing, IPTA movement is very powerful in Andhra.
Andhra, yes. It's a communist movement.
And women readers and women writers, the Andhra Mahila Sabha may be a powerful reason, I think.
Not Andhra Mahila Sabha, it is a women's organization of left-wing women organization.
Left-wing women organization. And after the collapse of Soviet Union, what is the identity politics is due to free market economy. After new economic policy, it is a free market.
Yes.
So these are all the things I will give space for others.
Immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we don't have much change in our society. Why? Because at that time our Naxalite movement here is in the peak. That's why the Telugu society doesn't feel much about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then afterwards, now the people may felt about it. Why? Because Naxalite movement is also taken aback. And what you are asking, sir?
That contingency to the major contingency migration to ES. And one more thing I want
to tell you about the migration.
One more thing I want to tell you. This present day short stories characterizing the character. That is maybe due to the more and more alienation of the individual from the social.
Society. Yes, that's true. That's true. That is true. So
okay, thank you.
Some of the experiments, whether in the west or in the east or wherever it is, some of the experiments do come out of necessity, one thing. There are two necessities. In emergency, there were stories of a particular type without criticizing the government, but to criticize it. So that is a necessity. The same way, when you are in search of a subject, it is necessary for you to write. Unless a writer writes, he cannot sleep. So he wanted to write something or other. So at the time of what to do, what to write, he will have 100 thoughts in his mind. To put those 100 thoughts on paper in a different tone and tenor is the story now. That is one way. The second thing is that's why all experiments, most of the experiments are out of necessity they came out. Even with just like that, experiments doesn't come in any literature, even in Western literature or in Russian literature or in Chinese literature also. Delusion, there's a famous Chinese writer, he did so many experiments in writing short stories, but all are because of necessity. The same way, leave about that. The second thing you asked is about the diaspora stories. I call them as diaspora. Lot of people right now, one observation says that around 15 lakh people are there, 1.5 million people are there in US, only in US. So most of them out of 1.5 million, a million people have traveled to US for the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, a decade otherwise. Prior to that, the people who has got some literary interest, literary value, they cherish literary value here and they travel to US. But for the present generation who are going to US, doesn't have that much of literary taste. They have a career orientation is their main force to go to US. In those days, besides the career orientation, they have some literary taste. So with that, what is happening is, instead of the young writers previously, 70, 50, 40, 30, 40 years back, there are some Telugu writers who write about the diaspora. After going there, they started writing. After settling down in their career, they started writing about themselves. They starting about their reminiscences when they were in India, and like that. And a few people started about the interactive activity with the local society there. Like Veluri Venkateswara Rao, there is a person. Like Kanneganti Chandra, there is another person. Those people, they are writing the real diasporic stories. But very recently, for the last 5-6 years, even the young writers, young in the sense below 40 years, around 40 years, 40 years range people also writing short stories in Telugu after after settling down in US. Now, very recently, Sahitya Academy has published an anthology of diasporic short stories of Telugu. And there are at least half in our anthologies. We have published so far 483 stories in different for the last 32 years. We have published around 480, 500 stories, and from 195 writers. Out of 195 writers, around 10 to 15 writers are abroad. And out of 483 stories, we have published around 20 stories, diasporic stories. So, writing diasporic tendency, diasporic stories is on the. A lot of people are writing. At least around 20 to 30 people are writing abroad in US. And very few people are in UK. 1 or 2 people are in European countries.
Thank you, Mr. Naveen. Actually, the time has run out. As such, we will not have the favor of hearing that interesting story you narrated to me in Salem.
Which story?
That one. Buffalo eats a cow.
ஒரு நிமிஷம் நான் சொல்றேன். மாய் முந்தா by பெத்தின்டி
Ashok Kumar story.
See, there are things which are going on. Anyhow,
that is very difficult to narrate also. It doesn't have much story, actually. It doesn't have much story. You have to feel it, read it and feel it. That's it.
No, what is all about? That's even that.
This is all about. This is all about a cow and calf, and this is all about a human nature. In nature, what the human tendencies are there, the animals also will have the same tendencies, but humanity and the animals will have that. Roughly, it says that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Naveen. Actually, we were close by 9:30. Unfortunately, I'm not able to mix others. Not all others to speak. We have got a lot of people might have questions. I will collect them and send it to you if you can answer them.
Okay, sir. Right.
It's a wonderful talk on this. This one, exactly the Tamil Ilakkiya Varalaru being published by many people, and about 5 volumes to come. They are also speaking like this periodically. Anyhow, it is a very informative talk. I should thank you very, very much for having a different type of story narration. And it's a wonderful thing, Mr. Naveen.
Thank you, Mr. Kirubanand. But unfortunately, I wanted to say sorry to you about my bad English, one thing. The second thing is, I could not note it down. Otherwise, I would have performed in a better way, because I could not note down the history and other things, and properly preparing became a problem for me. So I am sorry for that.
No issue, sir. No issue. That's an interesting one. It is a different this one. And now we can shifting to Tamil for the benefit of others. இப்பொழுது வந்து அடுத்த வாரம் என்ன நிகழ்வு என்று அறிவிக்க வேண்டும். அதற்கு பிறகு ஒளிச்சித்திரம் வரும். இப்போ அடுத்த வாரம் வந்து நான் வெளியில் சொல்லாம நான் சொல்ல போகிறேன். ஏன்னா சர்ப்ரைஸாக வச்சுக்கிறாங்க. வேணா ஒரு க்ளூ கொடுக்கலாம். 2 தடவை பண்ண ஆரம்பிச்சு விட்டு போன நிகழ்ச்சி அடுத்த வாரம் இருக்கும் என்று நம்புகிறோம். அதை பத்தி நம்ம நேரடியாகவே கண்டுபிடிச்சிருக்காங்க. இப்போ அடுத்ததாக இந்த விதத்துடன் இந்த நிகழ்வை முடித்துக் கொண்டு நாம் இப்போது ஒழிச்சு தெரிவித்துள்ளோம்.
చెప్పండి సార్, ఒరే నిమిషం அவர் சொல்ல போறாரு. சொல்லுங்க, చెప్పండి.
One thing is, this is the stories, this is the book which you have published after 25 years of completion of our anthologies. These are the 2 volumes with 2,600 pages short stories. There are around 400 short stories in this. This is one of the unique books which you have published.
Your contribution to the
Thank you.
Recording the development, even way of publishing book itself is great.